Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our show today. I'm delighted to have three very special guests and friends with me today. We're talking about a heavy topic that's very important during the holidays. And so I have Rachel, Bryan, and Jen with me to discuss walking with grief. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass off to Rachel to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about where she's coming from with this topic.
I'm coming from Virginia. Hi, my name is Rachel Tenpenny, and I am the founder of Hungry for Healing, which is a website, a resource center, basically, that is devoted to helping people heal after loss and other really hard things. I specifically developed my own program that is meant to help lead people to healing after loss and through grief, because I believe that we need more emphasis, more skills, more support around healing, not just understanding grief and pain. My program is also holistic, so it involves the full, the full scope of all of the things that you need to help your body heal physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. And I love helping people heal after loss. It's like my passion. So
thank you. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen. I am from Los Angeles, California, and I am a mom, a wife, a children's pastor, a graphic designer, entrepreneur. And my connection with loss is I have often found myself coming alongside people as they're going through a loss, whether it's a relationship or someone who has passed away or things like that. And then when I experienced my own divorce and the suicide of my ex-husband and the father of four of my children, I experienced grief in a whole new way, and it really made me passionate about finding a way for people to healthily and safely, emotionally safely go through grief. And so I'm really excited for today and to hear from these other two people who have even different experiences and some expertise in this area.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Bryan.
Hi, I'm a photographer, dad, and a couple of dozen of other things. I have an interesting relationship with grief. I spent some time around death that was unexpected a lot in my teens and in my 20s, and have been sort of adjacent to a lot of suicide and heavy drug use in my community and my friend circle in those times. Also had some interesting chapters in my later life, not too recent, that have really just reshaped how I deal with the world and people around me and myself, certainly. I currently study a lot of religious history and comparative religion to bolster my worldview, and a lot of the tenets and a lot of the philosophy in there kind of helps me posture myself toward these kinds of heavy things with a sort of a beneficial outcome. So that's my thing.
Thank you. I'm Betsy. I am delighted to call you all my friends. I have, besides, I guess what you call the more normal grief of losing three of my grandparents over the past 15 years, which is not easy. I also lost two friends to suicide in the past 7 years who I grew up with. And so interestingly, I'm back in my hometown this week for the holidays where we all grew up. So every year is different. It's now been 7 years for one, and about 2.5 years for losing my other friend who were close to each other as well. So learning how to process those sudden shocks and try to maintain close relationships with the family members who lost and friends that we all suffered a big loss together, but we all feel it in different ways in different times. It's an ongoing journey for me. So alrighty, well, we have some really great questions come into us this week. So I'm gonna start with you, Rachel, on the first one, which is I'm in a state of shock after losing someone close to me suddenly. I just feel numb. Will this get any better?
Well, I probably should maybe preface this question by explaining that the reason why I even am in this grief world is because I buried my baby daughters when they were a couple of weeks old. And then years later went through a brutal divorce. And so I've experienced personal losses myself. I'm not just the observer of other people's grief and loss. And so I can answer that question by saying sort of there's good news and bad news. First, the good news is you will not always feel this way. You are not trapped in a single, like in a numbness that's never going to go away. But the bad news is when that numbness lifts, you're going to face a whole series of emotions that are part of grief. And many of these are going to be very difficult emotions because right now that numbing phase, that sort of frozen shock phase, is your body's way of protecting itself from the extreme emotional pain. And so once that protection mechanism starts to die down and our bodies want to go back into living life, they want, they don't stay in that place forever, at least. I mean, some people can, I suppose, but most often we don't. And now you're going to have to face the rest of the grieving process. And there's no map, there isn't only one way to process grief, but there are a lot of similarities in how we grieve. And that shock numbness phase part does seem to be kind of the first one. But it will go away, but it'll launch you into a decision that you'll have to make about if you want to start on the healing path and actually face and process and get help and support for all of the rest of the emotions that come with grief, or you kind of want to shut down, stay in the numbed out phase and avoid the process. And it is a choice, believe it or not, even though you'll often hear in our culture that, time heals all wounds. It doesn't. Your action steps, your choices, the things that you choose to do with time is what will heal you or keep you stuck, because there's only two things you can do with pain. You can either transmit it or transform it. And that's so you have to decide. Are you going to engage in the process so that you can actually get to the other side where there's healing? Or are you going to avoid the process? And that is what will cause you to stay stuck. So the good news is you don't have to be stuck if you don't want to be. It's completely up to you. So this shock and numbness that you feel, when you don't want to feel it anymore, you don't have to. You do have options here. You do have choices as far as how you can nudge yourself and start taking those baby steps through the grieving process.
Bryan, some thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's great. I wouldn't have too much to add. I would say that grief is fortunately very similar to a lot of what I guess you could like lump in a category of the heavy stuff of life. I don't know how trite it's become, but it's still true that embracing sort of this experience for what it is, in the West and our culture, like she was mentioning, is very much focused on maintaining comfortability. Like our highest order of value and virtue is comfortability. I want to be at 72 degrees all the time. I want my lower lumbar supported. I want high fat and high sugar content in my food. I just want to be comfortable all the time. And sort of the byproduct of that is anything that jeopardizes optimum comfortability, we put, and that builds this habit of, just not having a healthy relationship with all of that stuff that is just so necessarily part of life. It just is. And so, you know, when you posture yourself in a position facing whatever this heaviest thing is, grief is a really, really heavy thing. But when you embrace it and when you face it for what it is, allow it to be what it is, and the more you sort of dance with this experience, you know, it may take a year, it may take 10 years. I don't know. Everybody's sort of on their own thing, but the more you go with it and the less you push against it. And, you know, that seems to be the recipe for success, in my estimation. And, you know, the reason why we don't do that is because we have a very, very loud and dominating voice in our head. You can call it the ego, call it the devil, you know, whatever you want to call it. It tells you that it's going to hurt and you don't want to be hurt. You don't want to face this thing. You really don't. It's too big. It's too heavy. It's too loud. It's too scary. You know, it's too whatever. But that's, you know, that's just an overactive, again, we don't have a healthy relationship with that voice, you know, out here in the West. And so, you know, we just, it's scary, but courage and action really can just push you through. And the more you sort of have a loving and healthy relationship with that experience and that side, you know, the better, I don't know, it's, you don't want to say it's like better to feel ultimate pain, but in some sense, you know, it is. So I guess that's
I think
I've got 15 Bible metaphors and 2 messages from the
Well, I want
Dhammapada,
to give Jen a chance to respond as well.
but sure.
Thank you, Bryan.
I don't really have much to add to the actual question from what they've said, other than really good job for asking and for being brave enough to step out and to ask about how you're feeling and to ask about where you are. Because honestly, that is the first step of embracing the scary and the unknown, which is what comes after the numbness. If I don't feel this forever, what comes after? Or what if I do feel this forever? What does my life look like? So good job on being brave enough to ask that question and to be willing to hear what someone else has to say towards the possibilities.
no, well, I think Bryan, yeah, first of all, you're so sweet, Jennifer. Sweet. But I think Bryan touched on something important though about how, you know, grief skills, healing skills after loss are life skills. Okay, we're not born
True.
knowing how to do these things. We don't have like a microchip that we download into our brain when the first hard thing happens in our life, and we're like, oh, this is the plan. This is how we should do this. This is how we should navigate this. Like, we have to learn those things. And depending on where we come from, what our background is, what was modeled to us growing up, what our belief system is, even our personality, like extroverts process very differently from introverts. Like, there's all these reasons why as individuals we have an individual response from grief. But it's also not just nature, it's nurture too, depending on what we've been taught, what's been modeled to us, told to us. Some of us are more equipped or less equipped to handle life's hardest things. And so, you know, like Jennifer was like, it is okay to say, I don't know how to do this. So I'm going to seek out help or information or support, or at the very least, I'm going to give myself grace that I don't have every answer and every method, and I don't have this clear cut plan, because I'm learning as I go. And the best I can do is just commit to the process and not lay down and say, well, time will heal all my wounds. Well, it's God's will. Everything happens for a reason, or all of the other millions of platitudes and cliches that actually take our power away, the power that we have over healing our own heart. Because even when you can't control circumstances and you can't control people, you still control what happens to your own heart. And this is not, I know sometimes that sounds scary because you're like, no, this is too hard, I don't want to do it, you know, like Bryan was saying. But it's actually the best news you could ever hear, because it means that you're not at the whim of fate or luck or time to get your life back. You can do it if you're willing to learn and then apply those life skills, those grief skills, to your healing process.
Thank you. I think, for me, there's a state of shock that happens, in the first week, especially in the first few months. And that's, of course, the time when a lot of times you're making arrangements, you have to take care of getting somewhere and, really being with others. And, if you can talk to people, that really is, or, spend some time, sometimes not even speaking. But I mean, I remember when I lost one of my friends, before I was able to fly back here from California, I took Courtney with me to the house of prayer where they just sit and play music. And I hadn't been able to cry at first. I was actually babysitting a 4-year-old when I got the call and my friend's gone. And I knew that when the phone rang, because one of my friends, she almost never calls me. We see each other, but she almost never calls me. The minute I saw her, she was calling me, I almost immediately knew what happened. But I knew my friend had not been in a good place because I had been in touch with her. I'd been trying, I'd been praying, I'd been doing everything I could to even see her, and she wouldn't make time for me because she was in such a state of overwork and distress. But after a few days, I took my friend to the house of prayer and we just sat with some music, and then I was finally able to cry a little bit and let it go. Whereas before I was just surviving, processing without being able to. And I just I told Courtney, thank you so much, because you're here and your comforting presence, I felt safe enough that I could cry. For some reason, by myself, I couldn't do it. And Rachel's right. The numbness is a gift to help you take care of yourself in those initial moments. And it's not a gift to never let yourself go there and never let yourself feel it, and never, and especially if that will, spill out to other people, then you're not letting other people feel and process their pain either. So
Yeah. And I think you're right on the money, Betsy. Especially as a dudes aren't supposed to cry and all that. But the body has such a magnificent way of like dealing with things that go on with you. If you're sweaty, if it's hot, your body sweats to cool you down. If you put junk in your body, it's got systems to get rid of that junk. You know, when you feel heavy things in your life, the natural response is to cry. When you feel pain, whether it's, physical or emotional or spiritual, however you want to classify it, when pain is felt and you feel pain, the body's natural response is to cry. And we all have that innate awareness to know that we're about to cry, and pushing it down and saying, no, I'm not going to cry, I'm too tough for this, or I'm too this for that. You interrupt the body's natural process of like processing this grief, which does still hurt. Like, it's another layer of hurt. There's, the physical pain hurts. If you really go with physical pain, like a bone break kind of physical pain, or childbirth, like these really big things, going with the pain, like, this is what the nurses tell you to do. You gotta do it, breathe with it, go with it. And the body's natural response is to cry, and going along with a good, deep, heavy cry hurts, because it's such a multi-dimensional experience, crying over something really heavy. But it's healing in a way that, there's nothing else. There's just nothing else.
right. And yeah, when a little kid falls down on the playground and cries, male or female, there's no gender gap there. When they're little kids, they're both gonna let it go. It is really, it seems like a social thing that we're training them to not respond to pain the same way as they get older.
And that's what we do with my daughter. When she falls down and scrapes her hand and she's crying, the old school way is, you just scraped your knee, stop crying. But a conscious effort my wife and I have been taking with her is to say, like, just kneel down with her and just be gentle and allow her to cry. Did it hurt? Yeah, it did. And that turnaround time is so much quicker. Like, yes, it did hurt. I hurt a lot. And now that, for whatever reason, that's the process, acknowledging it. And it works with a knee scuff when you're 3, and it works with, catastrophic heartbreak when you're 43.
Amen. All right, next question. We're going to start with Jen. Jen, how would you handle a conversation where someone is trying to tell you how you should handle your grief?
Those are some challenging conversations, especially depending on how raw the emotion is inside of you. But I would say that anytime you're in a conversation and someone's trying to tell you how to handle it, if they're gracious and they have ears to hear you, then it's good to just listen. And, you can say, I hear what you're saying, something acknowledged, but you don't have to take it in. The other part is if they're at a point where they're talking and you're not ready to hear it, or it's something that you feel is violating what you want to do or how you feel, it is absolutely okay to tell them that. I would say that it is absolutely okay for you to be empowered to own your own way of healing and to say, you know what, right now I'm not ready for this conversation. I appreciate that you're trying to help me, but right now this just isn't a place that I can go. And doing that is empowering to you, but it also means it's so important. I feel any time where your emotions are heightened and where you're really at a raw place and you're in the process of healing, it's important to not just let anything and anyone in. It's just like a wound, a gaping wound. You're not just going to let anything into that. You're going to keep it clean. And so part of what Rachel was saying is we're responsible for what's in our heart is also guarding what comes in. And that means telling people, you know what, we're just not going to go here. And I think that that's really important to know that you can do that.
Thank you, Jen. Rachel?
Yeah, well, I think something we keep touching on and are kind of in both of these questions so far is the idea of boundaries. Boundaries are such an important life skill, relational skill that oftentimes are revealed during a season of grief because grief robs you of your coping mechanisms. So the things that you might normally tolerate or deal with or kind of handle, say you have a really strained relationship with your mother, or you have a very overbearing church, or you have things going on in your life that when you have all your coping mechanisms, you've just sort of like, oh, we deal with it, or oh, we overlook it, or oh, we give them a lot of grace. But then when you have no coping mechanism, when pain has just stripped you, you are now, like she said, raw. Like it's like getting a sunburn. Like you can totally wear a shirt every day when you're normal. You get a sunburn, you can't even like put a shirt on because it's so painful. The grief equivalent of that is realizing that you don't have healthy boundaries in your life, because when grief stripped you of your coping mechanisms, you're like, oh man, I've been making all these allowances or having these unhealthy relationships or things going on in my life. And it often will show itself when someone in your life is saying like, this is how you should respond, or this is what you should do. And for me, in my experience, it wasn't even always people telling me what to do. And there were, trust me, there were plenty of people who told me what to do. But mostly it was more like placating and invalidating, like, you're strong enough, Rachel. If anyone can handle this, it's you. You're being tested, pass the test. You've got the faith for this. I'll just pray that God will return all that the locusts have eaten. My baby daughters died. There's nothing that can return them. Things like that are just horribly invalidating. And so what I had to learn was how to create those healthy boundaries. And what I would often do is try to set those boundaries before I even found myself in that situation. So during my deepest grief and my coping mechanisms were the lowest, I didn't go to Bible study because I didn't want to hear 29 women tell me lame things. Rather than deal with each one of them, telling them, please, I'm not ready for this, or, oh, okay, I'll take that in consideration. I did not have the emotional bandwidth for that. So I simply set a boundary for a certain season in my life where I just didn't go, or I didn't go to, whatever, to a holiday event. I remember we rearranged Thanksgiving that year because my girls died in July, and by the time November rolled around, I wasn't ready to have everyone over. I had this vision of having 2 little high chairs with brand new babies, at Thanksgiving, and they weren't going to be there, and I just wasn't at the place where I could handle it. But my point is, I understood that, like, right now, this is the only, as far as the boundary can go. And I wasn't ashamed or embarrassed, or I felt an obligation to be able to just simply say, this Thanksgiving is going to be different because I don't have the capacity to do it the way we used to do it. And then knowing that I can make that decision then, but I can change my decision and make a new choice at any time. So the next Thanksgiving, a year later, was very different. I wasn't making a permanent decision, but part of the healing process after loss is renegotiating all of those boundaries. And sometimes that even means not only telling certain people, like, I'm sorry, but this is just not helpful to me right now. I would like to end this conversation. But it's also sometimes preventing those situations from even happening in the first place, and not subjecting yourself to sort of this bombardment when you don't need to. You can, like, preemptively create a situation that limits that, not perfectly, but at least a much better job. Like, you don't have to be a glutton for punishment. You are allowed to build a hedge around yourself for a season of your life when you're just like, this is all I can handle right now. And that's allowed, and it's okay, and it doesn't make you a bad person. And if you're struggling with feeling that way, you've probably struggled with boundary issues your entire life. And so one of the ways that you need to learn to heal is you're going to need to learn how to develop healthy boundaries, unravel codependency, deal with false guilt, those kinds of things.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I think when people are trying to help us, a lot of times they think they're trying to help us, but there is this part of them that is trying to seem insightful, or bring the Holy Spirit into your life in a way that the Holy Spirit did not call them to go. And it takes a great sensitivity to really say anything. And a lot of times, Job's comforters. No, Bryan likes the book of Job. Job's comforters, tried to tell him a lot of things, that were no help. And I remember, honestly, I will say that people in my church, I'd been going to a very large church for several years up until 2013 when my ex-boyfriend died. And because I grew up here in Illinois and I was living in California at the time of his death, no one in that church had ever met him. So, and most people that I had built, even the ones that I had built fairly close relationships with, or been in community groups with for years, they still didn't know anything about him or the relationship that I had had with him since I was 12, which was a very significant part of my life. It was 19 years that I knew him. And so I had already shared with my community group, that I was struggling with some things about being part of this church. They weren't like, big major slights or major theological problems or anything like that, that just I felt I wasn't sure if I could continue. And after he died, I just, for the first time in my life, I quit going to church for 2 months, and I just watched football on Sundays. And one of my friends she gave me permission. I was just talking about it. I was like, is it okay? I think it's okay, but I just can't, because I don't mind going to church and asking for prayer about all kinds of things, but this is too private and too hard. And I'll never be able to explain it in a way that makes sense. And people did offer themselves to me very kindly and say, if you just want to come over and cry in my living room, and it's totally fine. And that is very sweet, but there is no way that I was gonna do that with this particular pain. And so when I started going to church again, I started going to the one that I could walk to, that was very small, and where I knew that they were Lutheran, so they probably wouldn't ask me a lot of personal questions about myself, and I didn't feel like they would get in my space. And so I was ready. And that's exactly what happened, and they've been wonderful. So, Bryan, did you have some thoughts you wanted to add? Uh-oh, Bryan disappeared.
As soon as my light comes back on. Yeah, of course. Technical difficulties. Yeah. I don't think there's anything much more that I can add. Although I think it marries nicely with what we were just talking about. You know, like the example I gave with my daughter, like, you know, don't feel the pain, you're fine, versus allowing them to sort of just heal with it. I think, and kind of what we were talking about earlier as well with the comfortability. I think this is why, at least in my own experience and some experiences I've had, I've heard over the years, is, you know, people are just very uncomfortable with disorder or like dismay, and just one of the natural instinct is to fix it. And not everybody's operating from there, but that is why there's a lot of just like, oh no, let me help you, let me fix you, let me be with you. And they are trying to help in some way, but just understand it's like it's a heavy thing. And if we're going to be bringing up Bible stuff, the example is like, when Jesus is with the prostitute, you know, this girl's about to face her death, over, you know, state funded shaming. And there's not much he does other than sits by her and says like, you know, I love you, I accept you, you're fine, just go do better. I don't need to fix you, I'm just here, that's it. And that seems to be like, you know, it needs to be a proportionate sort of response, which is hard to get. And I would just echo again, you know, being honest with the people around you is usually the best. I mean, that's kind of just best policy anyway, but, you know, pushy people, at least in my life, that, you know, just pray harder. It's like, well, I appreciate you trying to offer that to me, but yeah, I've been doing that for 25 years and I'm still depressed. So sorry. Thank you though. You know, it's hard, especially because a lot of emotional distress can sort of maybe make it a bit harder to get out what you really mean and what you really want to say.
Look,
But
what
I
one thing, sorry,
go
Bryan. One
ahead.
thing I wanted to add though is oftentimes the people in your life, your grief triggers their worst fears.
Yeah.
People that are not in a healthy place or have never really done hard things, or you know, because Bryan's right. Some people, that comfort quotient is really high, you know, and it's interesting though, because I wouldn't consider myself one of those people. Like, I'm not crazy. I don't like go seeking pain and destruction, you know, but I was never one of those people that's like, oh, it's hard. If it's hard, I can't do it. You know, I'm tough as nails. You know, I'm free spirited. Everything I did in my life, I did all in. You know, I don't have some weird, like, can't deal with anything that's not the status quo. But when my girls died, I was incapacitated by the level of grief. And I would say that my coping skills were pretty darn high. And so for me to watch myself be annihilated by pain, when I know that my pain threshold was pretty high to begin with, shook me to the core, because I thought, my goodness, if I can't even handle this, what the heck are other people doing out there? I mean, I remember for the first time in my life understanding why people stick like a needle in their arm. Now, I didn't put a needle in my arm, but I completely got it, because sometimes there are some things that are just so painful and there's no rationale that takes you out of that pain. And then other people in your life are watching you like writhe in emotional agony, and it terrifies them. I mean, I remember watching women, you know, walking towards me and then recognizing who I was at MOPS or church or, you know, whatever thing I was a part of, and literally turning around and walking the other way, because very few people are okay watching a grieving mother walk in their direction. And this is
Yeah.
part of why we have to learn not only how to heal our own hearts through grief and loss, but how to be a better support system to the people in our lives that are grieving. Because when we heal and we deal with our own crap, you know, we get stronger. We get more comfortable with being uncomfortable, we can show up better for the people who are just crumbling. Because just like Jesus, that support where you just sit there and go, I'm here, makes all the difference in the world. But if we're so broken and uncomfortable that even though we're not grieving, we're triggered by other people's grief, that we can't even sit there and be with them, that is a major problem, because grief isn't a problem to solve. It's just a season to weather, and we need to do it together. You know, you hear all the time, well, grief is your own journey. Well, it is, in the respect that there's uniqueness to all of our grief because we're unique individuals, but it isn't our own journey. It's a journey that's meant to be done in relationship with other people. We have to stand in the gap for each other. We have to walk side by side. We have to carry our friend, carry our brother, be a support system. And that doesn't mean we're codependent and it's our responsibility to heal others. But that support, that validation, that camaraderie is crucial in a season of grief. It can take something that's crushing you, and all of a sudden you feel like, oh my gosh, I think I can make it. And nothing has changed other than someone's just walking it with you. That's super powerful. And so we're, you know, a lot of people come to me when their world is shattered and they're just like, I don't know what to do. But I probably, maybe a third of my clients are people who love somebody who's hurting and don't know what to do with, you know, for them, and just want to be better at supporting them. And I think those two things, learning how to heal and learning how to be more supportive of others who are healing, are literally like the two things that will change the world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I will say,
I
actually, sorry, go ahead.
well, I have a long tirade. So I think that is so 100% on the money, and it's got my wheels turning. Um, so I think everybody's sort of Christian leaning here, so I'll use the Christian one. I like the Buddhist representation a bit more because it's a little bit more poetic. But in Christianity, there's this concept called the Logos, and essentially this is the Godhead beheld, and all that is that speaks isness into reality, and it's contained within every single person that ever has or will exist. Um, and when it's contained within the person, it's called spirit. Um, and so you can think of like a good model would be the Trinity symbol. You've seen like all the different triangles. This is God the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit, and all that stuff. So you've got, I'll get there. You've got the Father, your Son, and your Holy Spirit, and that's the model of Christianity. So Father being represented by the Logos. So when you go through grief, the Buddhists would say that there is grief and it's with you. And going off the model that that the Bible purports, even like, you know, Dr. Bronner's jars and all that stuff, everybody's one. This is becoming more secularized, that everybody's sort of interconnected and we're all sort of one. The way that's helped me a lot processing my own grief and my own sorrows and you know, a life long with depression is sort of reframing it and saying, there is grief, there is loss, and I'm participating in it. And because I'm connected with somebody, with everybody else, I'm feeling grief along with everybody else that's feeling grief at this moment. That's why it's so heavy, because it's the biggest thing to behold. It's just the slice of reality that is grief, and when you go with it, it's heavy because it's felt by all of these people throughout time. And it's such a magnificent, incredible process because it shapes you to be, if you go with it, of course, it shapes you to be this person that can be relied upon. And it like Rachel was saying, you know, it makes you a better, I don't know, citizen of the world, or a better person. And your new natural inclination, like Rachel, what you're doing is awesome. You know, shaping this heaviest thing possible and aiming it at the world for the greater good. That's the most noble thing, you know, anyone can do. And that's kind of what this process enables you to do. if you go with it hard enough, I would say. Anyway, tirade over.
That's fine. I was just gonna say, that vulnerability thing that Brene Brown, sort of brought to the forefront. We've had a sort of, we've talked about this a little bit before, that, this idea, I certainly had an idea that, being emotional in, a work setting was not professional. And I was rehearsing for a show after I had been out of opera for many years and had been cast in a Gilbert and Sullivan show that the last time I had done that show was with my ex. Well, so then he died right after our first rehearsal. And then I had the question of whether to continue rehearsing for this show or not. And I decided to do it, which was better for me than not. But it was really painful. And I remember being in the middle of trying to learn some choreography, which is always really hard for me, and really coming to the end of being stuck and finally having to turn to these other women that I was dancing with and saying, I have to tell you this, that I am really struggling because I am also like grieving right now. And I didn't want to, because I didn't know them, and I wanted them to think that I was professional and able to handle what I was doing. That was hard enough because they were brand new people that I had just met. And it turned out that two of those women became some of my best friends, including Jenny Lynn, who's been on the show before and will be on again next week. And it probably wouldn't have happened that way if I didn't open my mouth. In fact, I don't know if I would have made it through the rehearsals to the performances at all, and I needed that, because as horrible and brutal as the grieving was, there is something about sending yourself through the motions of something productive while you're grieving, if you can, that can really help. Jen, we haven't given you a chance to speak in a little bit.
That's okay. I love the picture of it being a weight and of everybody being connected and experiencing grief in that weight. And then what Rachel said is, when someone's there, you're able to just physically be there with someone. Because if you think about that, if something's heavy and you're trying to carry it by yourself versus someone comes along, they don't have to do it, they just have to take a corner, and all of a sudden the box that was unmanageable becomes more manageable in that moment. And so that visual of, oh my gosh, this is so heavy, and I don't have to go through it on my own, and all they have to do is do this. They don't have to, I'm not all of a sudden a project. Like, something that I discovered in a lot of pain is people feeling like a project. I had a friend and someone that I was mentoring, and she was brutally murdered, and walking through things with her children, because I was the mentor and the one people looked to. So being there for those in her family and things who had lost, plus mourning the loss myself, it made me realize I don't have to have the answers. I just need to physically and emotionally be present for other people, and allow them also. Just because I was in this relationship with her in life doesn't mean that I can't be present and we can't heal together and be okay, rather than having to take a certain position in the mourning process. And it made it easier, not less painful and not less, of an issue, but it was easier to know that you weren't doing it on your own, and it wasn't something so heavy that you felt it was going to crush you, like Rachel was saying.
Precisely.
Good.
I did want to add one more thing, though, where I differ, I think, just a tiny bit in something that you were saying, Bryan, is that, even though grief is a common experience that every human on earth will experience some level of, and, grief comes in all different shapes and forms. We have tangible losses, intangible losses. You have grief from losing something that you had. You also have grief from wanting so badly something you're never going to get. We have to come to terms with different forms of loss in our life in many various ways, and often not only once. Like, just because you take a big hit doesn't mean you're one and done. You're like, oh, good thing I got that out of the way. Like, you may take multiple hits, and each human walks their own path, and some people do have more grief and loss in their life than others, and why that is, I'm not exactly sure. But one thing I don't believe is that sort of grief is this thing that is present in our life and it shapes us. I think it is crucial to differentiate that it can destroy us just as much as it can build us. And the crucial differentiation is our response to it.
Correct.
We have participatory relationship with our pain, our grief, and our loss. And so, and I don't exactly think this is what you're saying, Bryan. I'm not trying to pick on you, but we hear just in the culture, like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Everything that's happened to me made me who I am today. Blah, blah, blah. I know tons of people who the hardest things that have happened to them annihilated them. And it crushed their spirit.
You're 100% right. One of the earliest stories in the Bible is the story of Noah. And the example there is it requires fervent, hyperbolically, I think he spent like 150 years, some sort of hyperbolic example like that, building the ark. And that's to say, like, this is a lifelong cosmic duty, is to prepare for an eventual flood, because it will come. And sometimes it shows up in losing the job that you really wanted, or losing a daughter that, and floods come. They come in all shapes and sizes, but the flood will come. And you're right. It's your participation is required. You must, the ark is a little masculine, like, this big, thing, this big thing. But, the example, the mythological sort of touchstone is spiritual fortitude is required to face the flood, to face the storm. And that process shapes you is I think maybe a better way to say it. So good catch. And I would agree.
Okay, so we have a few questions left, and we don't have much time, so I'm going to pick one that I think is worth going to next. They're all great questions, but to take a different turn. One person wrote, "God has abandoned me. What do I do?" Jen, you want to take that one first?
I want to take that one first. That's a challenging question to answer without being able to ask for more information. I would say that there are definitely times in life where we are going to feel that we've been abandoned, whether it's God or whatever people look to as their higher power, as their place of certainty. And when all of a sudden we feel like there's things that we don't understand and things that we can't control and things that we can't explain, we can feel abandoned. I would also say that often it feels like if we've been abandoned by something big, like a major loss, that feels abandonment over everything. And so when we feel alone, we kind of feel alone and isolated. As far as what you can do with that, I would say there's many things. Honestly, if you're a believer and you're a Christian who's looking to God and wants that relationship with God, I would say that he's totally okay with you asking him exactly that question. God, why have you abandoned me? Why aren't you here? What's going on? As a pastor, if someone were coming to me, that's what I was, it's okay to have that conversation. Also finding someone close to you that you trust, that you can just share your feelings with and explain to them what's going on. I think that's okay. And I think the important thing would be to not give up to whatever it is that's the trigger or the catalyst to you feeling that abandonment, to look for that and find someone that you can talk to and safely navigating through that. And I think from that, you're going to get your next step.
Good. Who wants to jump in next?
We actually just recorded a podcast. I'm in the process of putting together kind of a large project. I want 50 audio files of really important conversations about grief that can live forever on the internet, where people can access them anytime they need information. And one of my really good friends, he married my roommate in college when I transferred to Westmont. He wrote a book called The Will of God that examines every place in scripture where the will of God or God's will is mentioned. And it's a fascinating book. Because nothing will throw your theology, especially if you, for lack of a better term, have a misguided or poor theology, will throw it into upheaval faster than suffering, hands down. Like when you start to suffer, it starts to dismantle and unravel. And so I think sometimes when we have feelings like I've been abandoned, I think that goes a little bit deeper than just, God's abandoned me. What it's tapping at is it's saying whatever beliefs I used to have, the way that I thought it all worked, the things that I thought were truth are not aligning to my actual experience. What I'm experiencing is not matching up to what I always thought to be true. And that is a tall order to start unraveling, because the wisdom process is always order, disorder, then reorder. So you go into the disorder phase, and here's the tricky thing about grief, and this is why we need better grief support in this world, is because all of a sudden you are faced with doing the hardest things you've ever done. In some cases, it's dismantling and restructuring your faith. Other times, it's the complete dismantling of your relationships. All of a sudden, you realize, oh my gosh, I have codependent issues. Oh my gosh, there's so much trauma in my family. Oh my gosh, I have nobody to support me. I have terrible relationships in my life. Other areas, you're like, oh no, I'm an emotional eater, or oh man, I have an alcohol problem, or other like grief has a way of sort of shining this light to magnify anything, any sort of dysfunction in your life, because again, it takes away your coping mechanisms. And then what you have to do is figure out how to start taking baby steps through that process at the time in your life when you're at your lowest. So basically, grief is asking you to do the hardest things you've ever done at the most depleted phase of your life you've ever been. That's a tall order. And most people are just like, no, God abandoned me. Everybody is stupid. I hate life. Grief is forever. I will never be happy. And that's it, because it's just too much. And that's why my program, the very first thing I do is teach people how to nutritionally support themselves. Literally, like, go back to the basics. Are you eating? Are you resting? Are you getting enough water? Then I teach them how to pull in relationships, that support. So like when you're trying to balance that giant box and somebody catches an edge, you have to pull in a support system. Because if you don't somehow get yourself out of that complete depletion, that place of complete overwhelm, there is no way you can start taking those baby steps forward to process things like, I think God has abandoned me. I have dysfunction, or I need healing in other areas of my life. I don't have anyone in my life I can depend on. The list is long, all of those other things. Because some people do have that. Not everyone has a crisis of faith. Not everybody has crazy family they can't depend on. Not everybody finds themselves struggling, with alcohol because of their spouse died or whatever. But some people do. And then the only way through it is to face it when they're at their lowest point. And that's why that support I keep talking about, the ability to build each other up, to hold each other up, is so important. Because I don't care how enlightened you are, how strong you are, how much philosophy you have behind you, it will crush you if you don't have the capacity to pull in what you need, because what's right in here is not always enough. And you got to get yourself, like I always tell people, you got to survive before you can thrive. So first, we just got to survive. And also, secondarily, I feel God has abandoned me. Okay, but feelings are not always facts. Feelings are meant to be the clues that we listen to tell us what's going on in our hearts. Okay, feelings unearth the deep things. Okay, so one, we don't need to be afraid of them. They're not just going to take us over and run our lives. But we also should not dismiss them, push them down, ignore them, because they're trying to tell us something. But just because we feel something doesn't make it true. And we have to remember that.
That's good. Yeah, I would say that for me, the worst feelings of abandonment in my life and questioning God had a lot more to do with me having to adjust to a completely new environment and way of life, like at transition times, like functioning in college after a bad breakup and functioning after college, learning how that was probably the times when I'd feel the most confused and concerned about whether I had taken a wrong turn with God, or if I had misheard him about something, or didn't seem to be hearing anything new, but really feeling like dark and alone and like nothing, because my comfort mechanisms and my usual support systems weren't there, and I was going to have to rebuild new ones. And it's just not pleasant, and it's not fun when you had it really good where you were coming from, and now it can be really jarring going in a new direction. So, yeah, I would say God never abandons you, but you might want to check to see if you have abandoned yourself in some way, if you have rejected yourself in
Right.
some way.
But I mean, depending on your theology, though, depending on what you believe, God could have abandoned you. Because if you believe that like anything bad happening in your life is a reflection of being punished or failure on your end, then
Sure.
that would be interpreted as abandoned. Like, I guess my point is that's the kind of question that we got to go deep to unravel that.
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
would need like some serious time with that person to really hear them, really get an idea of everything that they're experiencing. Like that would be a
Yeah.
dialogue that would not
Background.
happen
Yeah.
overnight.
And I don't want to be presumptuous, whoever wrote that, but God means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Out here in the West, it's a him, and he's got a son. Out in the East, if you're a Buddhist, you're not really concerned with God. If you are Hindu, there are thousands and thousands of different representations of different aspects of God. Some of them are female, some of them are males, some of them are androgynous, some of them are elephants. If you're, an ayahuascario in the Amazon, it's a her. It really depends on where you're starting from. But to feel abandoned by something that is the largest of the largest, that's a really low spot. To use the Christian metaphor, it's the embodiment of God. It's mankind up on the cross,
Correct.
having said yes to the worst of the worst, which is dying by crucifixion. It's pretty bad. Betrayal by his beloved. It's pretty bad. And saying yes to all that and going through all that. And at the bottom, he cries out and feels abandoned. So that's a pretty good indication of the spectrum of experience. God incarnate can also feel the ultimate loss. So just think about that. You can feel ultimate loss, and still have sort of tether to the other side of the spectrum, I would say. And the Jesus example, and plenty of other examples in other religions as well, is saying yes to the process and saying yes to that and going through it. The consequence is rebirth into something new, like Rachel was saying. um, you know, uh, Facing it, going through it, and being reborn on the other side as to something new. And that's a process that works if you're, a Christian mystic or a psychotherapist. It's the same advice.
Well, and I think what Rachel is saying about when you experience something that's super tragic, something that's very heavy, something that shakes your world, it really does cause you to look at the things you believed as truths or as ultimate truths before and question. And I think that's an okay place to be. In fact, I think it's a healthy place to be when things come up in this world. And you're like, wait, this doesn't match this. What do I really believe? How am I going to live from here on out? Because I believe that here, but at this point today, that doesn't feel true. And to investigate that and to figure out what maybe you just accepted because it was what you always heard, what you accepted because someone else told you it was true, and what you truly believe is true. And I think that that's such a key point of healing in those times, and something that grief can really cause that's beneficial in our spirits and in our souls, is that healing of questioning, what do I really believe for me, and how is this changing that thought process for the future?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, being in that pit of feeling abandoned, no one should ever make you feel that, that feeling is just your own fault and of your own making, and that there's something that you did to create that feeling for yourself, because it is the very worst, especially if you're a person who really loved and delighted in your relationship with God, and it's a big part of how you see your identity. yeah, there's a lot of different ways that people could say, you know, that try to give you a meaning for it. But what you find in your own journey is what's going to be the most important for you.
That's right.
So keep
Yeah,
looking.
and
However, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
that middle ingredient, the death part, like you're all saying, a lot of it has to go. And, you know, that might be beliefs, that might be belief systems, it might be relationships, it might be something, but something will certainly have to be shed to be reborn. And it's a healthy process. It really is. You know, change, they say
But
change is the only constant.
but it is a painful process. And I
True.
think that sometimes what is, you know, so effective about just being able to be with people, you know, I work really hard with my clients, you know, when they tell me, you know, I feel, or, you know, I feel like God's abandoned me. You know, I don't sit there and argue with them about if he has or if he hasn't.
Yeah.
But I say it's, you know, validate, like it's true to them. It's what they are experiencing. And so they need to be heard. And then we have to slowly walk through the process of all that is underneath there, because the transformation process, it's an amazing one. Like it's, no one ever regrets transforming. Like they never get to the other side. And they're like, man, I do that. But the process itself is like a wringing out, right? It's like a complete dismantling. And, you know, that's where, you know, like sports analogies are always so good. You know, like we have like all these faith and religious analogies, but sometimes you just have to go to sports, you know, and like the greatest athletes in the world who do the most phenomenal things, acts of just physical amazement. What do they all have in common? Usually people's answer is like, oh, they have genetic, you know, abilities. They're genetically better, you know, or they're, you know, they're tougher. They were exposed to better opportunities. Like you could go, you know, better socioeconomics. I don't know, you could list off the things. And the only thing that we find when we study the world's top athletes is that they all have really good coaches. Okay. People who teach them, show them, push them further than they can push themselves. Who, when they're like, I'm out, I want to give up, this is too freaking hard, don't make me run one more time around this track, say, I believe in you, you can do it, we've got a plan, I'm watching you, I'm thinking when you're not thinking, I'm planning when you're not planning, you know. And that is how you do things you think you can't do. It's not by willpower, not by your genetic predisposition. You do it because you pull somebody in who walks with you.
That's
and
good.
They help give you strength when you don't have it and take you a little bit further than you think you can go.
That's right. Jack Johnson. Better
Well,
together.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much. We're at over an hour already, and we've got many more questions, so we could easily do another show, and maybe we'll do one more in the new year on this topic, which is wonderful. So thank you to each one of you for being with us. Jen, Rachel, and Bryan, hope you'll all come back. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone, thank you for watching.